Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere ancient, unsettling and oddly food-focused. Picture it dusty olive groves under an amber sunset, the scent of roasting meat drifting through the air, and just beyond the feast, someone quietly turning into a wolf. You didn't think bedtime stories would be served with a side of transformation curses and divine rage, did you? But that's what's on the menu in Greek mythology. Over and over again, mortals dig into meals they shouldn't invite the wrong guests, or disrespect the natural order and boom, they sprout claws for wings or worse. And while it sounds like something out of a werewolf flick, it's a pattern as old as the Parthenon. You probably won't survive this dinner party, but don't worry, you're here to listen, not to chew. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I always love seeing the Global Sleep Club come alive. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin in a quiet grove, shadowy and cool, surrounded by the ghosts of laurel trees and forgotten hymns. A low wind rustles olive branches overhead. Somewhere a lyre plucks softly in the dark. You're walking into a time when gods dined with mortals, and mortals often forgot their place at the table. In ancient Greece, hospitality was a sacred ritual. Meals weren't just food, they were a statement, a gift, a test. You never really knew who might show up at your door. Could be a beggar, could be Zeus in a crusty cloak. If you welcomed them well, you were rewarded. If you didn't, well, cue the lightning bolts. But the real trouble always started when people served the wrong thing or the wrong being. Food in Greek myth isn't neutral. It's powerful. Meat especially. When meat is shared in myth, it's never just dinner, it's destiny. The very first known food-related transformation, Tantalus. He's like the poster boy for doing dinner wrong. But we'll get to him in the next section. Right now, let's zoom out and get a feel for the vibe. Across hundreds of myths, there's this recurring theme: eat meat. Risk losing your humanity. It's not always direct. Sometimes it's symbolic, other times literal. But the outcome is consistent. Transformation, exile, divine wrath. You chomp, you change. It's worth noting that the Greeks weren't vegetarians. They had plenty of meat in their festivals and sacrifices. But there was a line, and in myth that line was usually drawn in blood. Cannibalism, for instance, wasn't just taboo. It was an invitation for cosmic punishment. It told the gods you thought you were above them. And then poof fur, hooves, madness, or being chained to a rock for eternity while a bird pecks out your liver, which honestly feels like a bit much for skipping the salad. Historians still argue whether these stories reflect real anxieties about food, scarcity, ritual purity, or social boundaries. Some suggest it was propaganda to scare people away from challenging the aristocracy or priesthood by wrapping morality in myths. Others believe it reflected deep fears about the loss of control, that beneath every human is a potential beast just one wrong bite away from surfacing, and the fringe theory. Some scholars think these myths were secretly written by early animal rights activists. Imagine that Athenian vegans slipping anti-meat messages into temple plays. Don't eat your neighbour Timon. You might end up a goat. You keep walking. A temple looms ahead. Its columns are cracked but proud, and at its base are the remains of a sacrificial altar. Stained stone. Blackened ashes. You imagine the smoke rising from past offerings, goats, bulls, maybe birds, and wonder how many of them got eaten and how many were just burned to appease whatever deity had the grumpiest Monday. And it wasn't just gods punishing meat crimes. Sometimes it was nature itself. Eat something cursed. You'd carry that curse forever. Boil your enemies and feed them to their family. You'd birth generations of haunted souls. Try to sneak a snack from a divine cowpen lightning buffet. Even today, if you really pay attention, you'll notice how many cautionary tales are food-based. Don't eat that apple. Don't drink from that cup. Don't nibble the bread if you don't know who baked it. Fairy tales and myths aren't so different when it comes to appetite and consequence. It makes you think about hunger not just for food, but for power, revenge, and immortality. In Greek myths, eating meat often wasn't about survival. It was about ego, and ego always gets you in trouble. So remember, as you settle deeper into your pillow, and the wind outside picks up just a bit, every myth tonight begins with a meal, and not a single one ends with a full, happy belly. You find yourself beside a long, groaning wooden table, the kind meant for festivals and sacrificial feasts. The scent in the air is smoky, but there's a faint undercurrent of something sweet figs, maybe honey. But beneath it all, something off. Meat that's been cooked too long, or perhaps something that shouldn't have been cooked at all. This is where Tantalus makes his fatal mistake. Tantalus, king of Lydia, was one of the few mortals invited to dine with the gods. That's not a common honour. Imagine getting invited to the table of immortals and deciding, you know what would be a fun prank. Trick them into eating human stew. Bold move. Terrible idea. In one of the darker origin stories of divine retribution, Tantalus murders his own son. Pelops boils him and serves the gruesome dish to the gods to see if they'll notice. Spoiler, they notice. Well, almost all of them. Demeter, distracted by grief after the loss of her daughter Persephone, absent-mindedly nibbles on the shoulder. That little bite becomes one of the weirder medical miracles in myth. When the gods resurrect Pelops, they replace the missing shoulder with a one made of ivory. Because nothing says apology accepted like turning part of your body into fine cutlery. This single act by Tantalus feeding meat that should not be served sets the tone for hundreds of myths that follow. The moral. Some foods are sacred, some are poison, and some, like your own child, are definitely off the menu. The punishment for Tantalus is deliciously ironic. For all eternity he's stuck in Tartarus, standing in a pool of water with fruit hanging just out of reach. Whenever he reaches for the fruit, the branches lift away. When he bends for a drink, the water recedes. Eternal hunger and thirst, perfect for a guy who misused a banquet. The phrase tantalizing yep comes from him, so next time you see a dessert, you can't have thanked this guy. Historians still argue whether the myth of Tantalus reflects real ritual taboos in ancient Anatolia, where his kingdom once stood. Some suggest it's a metaphor for the dangers of violating sacred hospitality. Others say it's political propaganda, warning nobles not to think they're above the gods. And then there's the fringe interpretation that the whole tale is a dramatized memory of human sacrifice being phased out of Greek religion. Think of it as a cautionary allegory. Hey, stop doing that thing our ancestors used to do. The gods hate it now. As you sit quietly at this spectral table, you realize how many Greek myths unfold around the dinner plate. Food is the start of transformation, the trigger for rage, and the test of morality. And in this story, poor Pelops becomes a living symbol of it all, resurrected from stew, a boy reborn minus one shoulder, who will go on to spark even more tragedy. But we'll save that juicy mess for later. The gods, of course, are disgusted by the whole affair, not just because it's horrifying, but because Tantalus tried to deceive them. They're omniscient. They invented the concept of knowing everything, so the idea of tricking them with a pot of long, simmered prince chunks laughable. You glance toward the far end of the table and spot a cracked bronze bowl scorched at the edges. Was that the one you'll never know? But the silence here is heavy with judgment. Back in the mortal world, this story spread like wildfire. In ancient festivals, people would retell the tale of Tantalus as a warning. Don't serve evil. Don't invite doom. And maybe, don't feed your dinner guests long pork if they're capable of turning you into a parched statue for all eternity. And remember Demeter, the goddess who absent-mindedly ate part of the boy. She later made sure Pelops lived a charmed life. Guilt, maybe, or just divine kindness. Either way, Pelops grew up into a famed charioteer beloved by kings and central to one of the messiest family dramas in Greek myth. But again, that's for later. Tonight you only need to linger here at the ghost feast and let the lessons seep in. The gods watch what you eat, and if they don't like it, they'll let you know in ways you'll remember forever. You lean back against the cool stone wall behind the feast table. The wind rustles again through the olive trees outside, and the shadows stretch a little longer. It's strange, isn't it, that eating something so ordinary could be the thing that makes you a monster or a memory. You slip away from Tantalus's cursed banquet table, letting the eerie echoes of boiling pots and divine disgust fade behind you. The path ahead glimmers faintly dusted in moonlight. It leads you to a different kind of dining disaster, one that, despite the horror, ends in a kind of miracle. Pelops, remember him? The stew baby, with the ivory shoulder. Well, now he's all grown up, and his story doesn't end with being eaten. Not even close. After his resurrection, Pelops becomes something of a celebrity. He's handsome, clever, and the gods seem to like him, probably out of guilt. The shoulder they gave him glows faintly under moonlight like pearl, a reminder of where he came from and what he survived. Eventually, Pelops sets his eyes on a prize, the hand of Hippodamia, a princess whose name sounds like it belongs in a heavy metal band, but who is actually a woman caught in one of mythology's cruelest competitions. Her father, King Oenomaus, doesn't want to give her up, so he invents a contest any suitor must race him in a chariot. If they win, they get the girl. If they lose, they die. So far, 12 suitors have lost. You can guess what became of them. Spoiler, not retirement homes. Pelops doesn't just show up and race. That would be too honest. He cheats, sort of. He gets help from Poseidon, god of the sea, who lends him a magical chariot pulled by winged horses. Some myths even say Poseidon was close with Pelops. Interpret that as you will. Either way, divine favoritism is never subtle. But Pelops isn't done stacking the odds. He also convinces the king's charioteer Myrtilus to sabotage the race by loosening the bolts on the king's wheels. In exchange, Pelops promises Myrtilus a reward, a night with Hippodamia. Classy. The race is chaos. Dust hooves, divine horsepower. Oenomaus' chariot breaks apart mid-race. He's thrown from the wreckage, tangled in the reins and dragged to death. Brutal, yes, but effective. Pelops wins. He gets the girl. And then, because this is Greek myth, he betrays Myrtilus by throwing him off a cliff. So now Pelops carries 2 curses. One from his father's cannibalism and another from his own broken promise. And this, dear listener, is where things get mythologically messy. Pelops' descendants become the most cursed family in all of Greek mythology. His sons, Atreus and Thyestes, oh, they'll get their own section. His grandson, Agamemnon, the Trojan War's greatest jerk. His great-grandson, Orestes, haunted by the Furies. But for now, focus on this strange, shimmering image, a resurrected man shoulder aglow winning a princess with a chariot of gods and betrayal. A man who came back from being eaten, only to ruin everyone else's appetite. Historians still debate whether the myth of Pelops originated from a real-life ritual of chariot racing and royal succession. Some think it was based on games held in Olympia, the same city that would later host the Olympic Games. Pelops was even honoured with a hero cult there complete with sacrifices. That's right, people prayed to the guy who was once soup. The fringe theory, that the whole story is a coded tale of Greek fears around arranged marriage and generational trauma. Win the race, get the girl, doom your descendants. Sounds about right. As you wander away from the now silent racetrack, you can almost hear the wind howling like a chariot's wheels. The stars seem to shimmer faintly above, casting silvery light on the dust-strewn road. And you think maybe that ivory shoulder glowed not just from magic, but from memory. A reminder that no matter how far you run your past, and your parents' bad choices tend to follow. You press forward through the night, there's another feast waiting, another meat mistake. And this time it won't be just one person punished, it'll be an entire bloodline. The road curls downhill, now winding into the shadowy remains of a vast palace. Its stone walls loom like broken teeth against the sky. You step over fallen columns and shattered mosaics, each tile whispering old names, Atreus Thyestes' vengeance. This is where the curse of meat truly becomes generational. If you thought Tantalus was bad, wait until you meet his grandsons, Atreus and Thyestes. Brothers, rivals, kings, and the poster children for why you don't mix family drama with potlucks. After Pelops dies, his sons squabble over who should inherit the kingdom. Atreus gets the throne first, but Thyestes, slippery as an eel in olive oil, seduces Atreus' wife and steals the throne. In response, Atreus does what any emotionally well-adjusted ruler might do. He invites Thyestes to a reconciliation banquet. The brothers sit across from each other at a lavish feast. Meat is carved, wine flows, laughter echoes until the reveal. Atreus had secretly killed Thyestes' 3 young sons, butchered them, cooked them, and served them to their father. Let that settle in for a moment. You're sitting at a table eating what you assume is lamb. And your brother leans across the platter and says something like, "Hope you liked the stew. Those were your boys." Greek tragedy levels unlocked. Thyestes understandably reacts with horror. And here begins the long, ugly ripple effect. He curses Atreus, and from there the myth spirals into an ever-thickening stew of murder, betrayal, and divine disgust. Generations suffer. No one walks away clean. You sit in the crumbling dining hall listening to the echo of old screams, the metallic ring of goblets dropped in shock. A dust-coated tapestry nearby still shows their family crest, though it's faded, frayed and stained. Mainstream historians view this tale as part of a larger morality lesson, how unchecked power and revenge poison not just individuals but entire families. It served as both warning and entertainment for ancient audiences, especially during Athenian theatre festivals, where stories of the House of Atreus were audience favourites. Like the Netflix of 5th century BCE but with more infanticide. Fringe theorists. They suggest the Feast of Thyestes could be a warped memory of ritual purification, an old abandoned tradition where taboo acts were once symbols of transferring guilt, or even older, a shadow of primal ceremonies meant to shock and cleanse at the same time. Whatever its origins, it's not a recipe you'd want to revive. And here's a thought that might keep you up tonight. There's no supernatural punishment for Atreus in the myth. The gods don't strike him down. He rules for years, which makes it even more disturbing. Sometimes the real monsters are just left alone with their thrones and their knives. You brush dust off a broken plate, its edge sharp and stained with rust, or is that something older? A breeze whistles through the abandoned palace, carrying a scent of iron and ash. You think about what meat meant to the Greeks. Sacred, powerful, dangerous. To feed someone was an offering. To feed them flesh they shouldn't eat was a declaration of war. Atreus didn't just feed Thyestes his children. He turned the act of eating into a curse that would live in every bite their descendants ever took. Eventually the gods respond not to Atreus, but through the unravelling of his line. His son Agamemnon gets tangled in war and betrayal. His grandkids fall to madness and vengeance. And it all starts with this dinner. 1 meal, 3 courses. 0 forgiveness. You rise and leave the palace, footsteps echoing against marble once walked by kings. Behind you the air still tastes of fire and bitterness. Ahead, the forest thickens and another story waits. One where meat doesn't just punish, it transforms. The trees thicken as you walk their trunks, tall and narrow like silent judges lining a corridor. Moonlight flickers between the branches, patching the path in silver and shadow. The air grows cooler now, heavier, charged with the feeling that someone is watching, and in a way, someone is. You've arrived at the tale of Lycaon, the first man to be turned into a beast for his sins at the table. Not just any beast either, the original werewolf. Lycaon was king of Arcadia, a realm of forests, wild animals, and remote mountain shrines. His people were rustic proud and, depending on who you ask, a little too, into strange sacrifices. When Zeus decided to visit Earth in disguise, as he often did, he chose Lycaon's house as his divine Airbnb. Now, in Greek culture, hospitality was everything. A guest was sacred, and treating them well was a matter of honour and survival. But Lycaon didn't buy it. He thought the traveller might be a fraud. So, to test whether the man at his hearth was really Zeus, Lycaon decided to do something truly unhinged. He served the god a meal made from human flesh. Yep. Again with the stew. This time it was either a local hostage or, in some darker versions, Lycaon's own son. Either way, the dish was unmistakably cursed, and unlike some of the other gods, Zeus wasn't in the mood for culinary tricks. The moment Zeus realized what he'd been served, he didn't send a lightning bolt, not immediately. First he flipped the table, then he stood, shook off his disguise, and revealed his godly form in a flash of thunder and flame. The whole palace exploded into ruin, and Lycaon, he didn't die. He transformed, first sprouted where his skin had been, his hands twisted into claws, his jaw lengthened into a snout, and his voice became a howl. He fled into the mountains, cursed to roam the wilds as a wolf for eternity. A punishment that suited the crime after all. If you behave like a beast, you become one. This story isn't just creepy, it's foundational. It gives us the very idea of werewolves long before medieval Europe picked it up. In fact, the word lycanthropy, the condition of believing you're a wolf, comes from this very myth. It's one of the earliest documented human-to-animal transformations in literature. Historians still argue whether Lycaon's tale was invented purely for myth, or if it reflects older rituals. Some believe the Arcadians practiced human sacrifice in their early cult worship of Zeus Lykaios wolf, Zeus. There's even evidence of bones found in ancient altars that support this, though whether they were human is, you guessed it, still debated. The fringe camp. They think Lycaon's transformation wasn't a punishment at all, but a spiritual elevation, becoming one with nature, embodying wild wisdom. A kind of dark ascension masked as a curse. Those fringe scholars are probably the same people who look at horror movies and say, actually the monster is the victim. You move now through a grove that feels older than anything you've passed. The trees are blackened as if struck by ancient lightning. Somewhere deep in the woods a low howl rises, too distant to fear, too close to ignore. And maybe you start to wonder about the symbolism. Lycaon didn't just lose his form, he lost his voice, his status, his humanity. In the mythological worldview that was worse than death, to become a beast was to be ruled by instinct, to no longer control your desires. Meat again was the trigger. Not the meat itself, but the meaning behind it. Feeding human flesh to a god wasn't just wrong, it was declaring that you saw no difference between human and animal, that the line could be crossed for curiosity or pride. And that line, once crossed, never leads back. You come to a broken shrine hidden in the underbrush, a stone carved with the outline of a wolf. Old offerings, bits of bone-dried leaves, even a few ancient coins rest at its base. People still remember, still whisper the name Lycaon on nights when the moon is full. And now you do too. You step away from the shrine, your path curving downward once again. In the distance, the forest begins to thin, giving way to a strange open clearing. Another story waits. This time it's not just one man becoming beast. It's a whole house, a whole dynasty slipping into madness. All because someone couldn't resist a very, very bad idea for dinner. You step into the clearing and the air changes. It smells dry metallic, with the faintest trace of smoke, like a bonfire that ended long ago, but left its memory in the dirt. The grass here is brittle, and there's a strange hush as if the ground itself remembers too much. You're now walking into the aftermath of one of the most cursed households in mythology, the House of Atreus. Yes, we're back to that family. Because it turns out the dinner from hell that Atreus served Thyestes wasn't a one-time catastrophe, it was a seed. And what it grew into was a sprawling forest of blood-soaked decisions, all rooted in one terrible meal. You remember Atreus the king, who killed his nephews and cooked them into a meal? Well, he had two sons, Agamemnon and Menelaus. Agamemnon would go on to become the leader of the Greek forces during the Trojan War. Powerful, respected beard, probably immaculate, but he carried the curse of meat in his blood. Long before the war, something strange happened. The gods stopped the wind. Just no breeze. The Greek ship sat helpless at Aulis, waiting to sail to Troy. Days passed, then weeks. Their supplies dwindled. Soldiers got bored. Someone probably ate all the olives. A seer announced that the wind had stopped because Agamemnon had offended Artemis, goddess of the hunt. Some say he boasted he was the better archer. Others claim he killed one of her sacred stags. Either way, she was not having it. So how do you fix a divine sulk sacrifice? Not just any sacrifice, your daughter, Iphigenia. Agamemnon is torn, of course. He loves his daughter, but he also really wants to win a war. And so, in one of the most stomach-turning moments in myth, he lures her to Aulis under the pretense of a royal wedding and prepares her for slaughter. Now here's where it gets mythically murky. Some versions say Artemis takes pity and swaps Iphigenia with a deer at the last second, whisking her away to be a priestess in Tauris. Other versions say, nope, she dies, and her blood feeds the wind back into motion. Historians still argue which version came first. Was it the tragic sacrifice meant to mirror earlier brutal myths, or the kinder revision made later to make Greek mythology a little less nightmare-inducing for the kids? Fringe scholars have other ideas. One theory suggests the whole Iphigenia story reflects a suppressed memory of ancient child sacrifice sanitized over centuries. Another posits she was originally a goddess figure absorbed into the mortal pantheon and rewritten as a victim to explain older rites. You can't throw a myth rock without hitting a theory, but no matter which version you choose, the core is the same meat again: sacrifice, offering blood to the gods for power. The Greeks believed deeply in do ut des, I give so that you will give. But this was giving at its most extreme, and the gods not always grateful. The sacrifice or the near sacrifice haunts Agamemnon, but he goes to Troy anyway, wins the war and returns home 10 years later, thinking maybe things will settle down. They don't. Waiting at home is Clytemnestra, his wife. She's been stewing, literally and figuratively. Some say she's furious over Iphigenia. Others say she's had a lover while Agamemnon was off playing hero. Either way, when he walks through the door, she welcomes him with a feast, bathes him, makes everything soft and warm. And then she stabs him in the tub. Once again, a family meal becomes a trap. Blood spills where wine should, and the house of Atreus loses another generation to the curse born from the meat that should not have been served. You stand now at the foot of what remains of their palace, a broken stair, a single torch bracket bent and rusted. The wind stirs slow and steady like it did at Aulis perhaps just after the sacrifice. There's no laughter here, no joy, only the quiet hum of consequences echoing through the centuries. You think about how, in these stories, meat is never just sustenance. It's a symbol of power, of sacrifice, of control. Who gets to eat? Who gets eaten? Who ends up as the main course? The Greeks were obsessed with these questions, and the gods weren't shy about answering. You move on following the scent of something animal and sour. It leads you deeper into the forest where heroes will soon hunt monsters. But not all monsters wear fur. Some wear crowns. The trees give way to wild hills, now rugged, scrubby slopes where beasts roam and heroes test their mettle. You hear the crackle of brush underfoot and far off the sound of hooves scraping against stone. A hunt is underway, and at its centre a wild boar, a tangled myth and another mess of meat-driven doom. This is the story of the Caledonian boar, a beast sent by a goddess hunted by heroes and ultimately torn apart by ego pride and family feuds. Because, of course, it is. It starts as these things often do with someone offending a deity. King Oeneus of Caledon hosts a harvest festival. Sacrifices are made, libations poured. Thanks given to every god except Artemis. Big mistake. Skipping Artemis, goddess of the hunt, is like throwing a party and forgetting to invite your very territorial neighbour who owns a pack of wolves. She notices. In revenge, Artemis sends a boar. But not just any boar. This one is huge, tusked like a demon, armoured with bristles, and so angry it tramples vineyards, rips up fields and gores anyone who tries to stop it. It's less an animal, and more a mobile meat grinder with legs. So, the king calls for help, and Greece delivers. A band of elite hunters gathers kings, princes, warriors, and one woman, Atalanta. Atalanta is not just there for diversity points. She's fast deadly with a bow and completely uninterested in impressing the boys. Naturally, this causes tension. The other hunters don't think a woman should be on the hunt, let alone lead it. But when the boar finally appears, raging out of the woods like a beast-shaped earthquake, it's Atalanta who draws first blood. She wounds it with a perfect shot. The others finish the kill, but the honour of the first strike is hers. Cue disaster. One of the hunters, Meleager, happens to be in love with Atalanta. He awards her the boar's hide, declaring her the true victor. Chivalrous, sure. Suicidal. Also yes. Because Meleager's uncle's furious that a woman has been given the prize, try to take it from her. So Meleager, already emotionally charged and probably high on battle adrenaline, kills his uncles on the spot. Let's recap. A boar is sent to punish someone for skipping a goddess. It destroys crops, ignites hero fever, and ends in intra-family homicide over a piece of monster jerky. Greek myth never lets a hunt be just a hunt. Historians still argue whether the Caledonian boar hunt was meant to mirror actual ritualistic hunts or symbolic trials of masculinity. Some suggest it was a metaphor for taming wild instincts, especially those related to appetite, lust, and violence. Others think it's an early tale of social shift, showing women like Atalanta entering traditionally male spaces and shaking things up. And then there's the fringe theory, always one more. It proposes that the boar itself is a stand-in for gluttony, or reckless consumption. The boar devours the land, and the hunters, in chasing it, reveal their own appetites for glory, for power, for pride. In the end, the beast isn't the only one cut open. As you imagine this hunt, the shouting, the clash of spears, the crash of hooves through undergrowth, you realise something. Even in a story full of action, it still comes back to food. The boar represents nature's fury and the limits of control. Slaying it should be about protecting the people, but instead it becomes about who gets the meat, who gets the trophy, And that question kills. You walk now through an overgrown glade where old trees arch like ribs above the trail. There's a hollow log beside you, split wide and mossy, almost like a tusk gash frozen in time. Somewhere beyond the trees you hear the faint rustle of dry leaves, as if something enormous still lurks out there. Atalanta leaves the story here, boar-hide in hand, returning to her own adventures. But the men, they fall into deeper tragedy. Meleager's death is coming, thanks to a cursed log and a mother's revenge, but that's a tale for another fire. For now, you walk on knowing that in Greek myth the chase is rarely about the prey. It's about the hunger, and once the meat hits the table, someone's always going to get hurt. You follow the trail where blood once cooled in the dust, where egos blazed brighter than torches, and where arrows never flew without a second meaning. The hunt is over, but the rules haven't changed. One wrong look, one wrong bite, and the next beast could be you. Now your path leads to a quieter glen perfumed with laurel and pine. A bubbling stream winds lazily beside the trail. Peaceful, almost sacred. But you've read enough myths by now to know that serenity in Greek stories usually means something bad is about to happen. You kneel by the water, its clear mirror still, and suddenly you feel it eyes, a divine presence, and then a rustle in the reeds. This is the story of Actaeon, a hunter who sees something he shouldn't. Actaeon is a talented tracker, strong and proud, born for the forest. One day while out hunting, he stumbles across a hidden pool, steam curling above it like silk. There standing in the shallows is Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, bathing with her nymphs. He doesn't speak, doesn't move, just watches. Maybe he's mesmerized, maybe he's just shocked. Or maybe though some myths try to spare him, he lingers too long. It doesn't matter. In myth perception is sin. Artemis sees him. She doesn't scream, doesn't hide. Instead she splashes a handful of enchanted water onto his face and says something calm, cold and final. You liked looking like a man, then you'll enjoy being prey. And just like that, Actaeon begins to change. His skin sprouts coarse fur. His fingers fuse into hooves. His mouth stretches forward into a snout voice swallowed in a gagging bleat. He tries to speak to beg, but all that comes out is panic, a deer's wide-eyed silence. Then he hears it, the baying of hounds. His own hunting dogs. They don't recognize their master. They smell blood, see antlers and chase. Actaeon runs, through trees he once owned, over hills he once conquered, but the hounds are faster, trained, loyal, merciless. They tear him apart. No meat is eaten in this myth, but the body becomes meat by default. One moment you're a man, the next you're the main course for your own pets. It's the kind of irony that only a goddess would serve cold. Historians still argue about the moral here. Was Actaeon's punishment just... Some claim it's a warning against violating divine privacy. Others suggest it's about hubris. He dared to look on a goddess as an equal and paid for it. But a fringe group of scholars thinks this myth isn't about nudity or violation at all. They think it's about the relationship between man and beast, specifically the thin line between hunter and hunted. Actaeon. A master predator becomes prey not through sin but through perspective. 1 second of seeing something he shouldn't, then poof, the wild claims him. And isn't that the underlying tension in all these myths, that your humanity isn't guaranteed, that the gods at any moment can strip it away, turn you into a deer, a wolf, a boar, or just an echo on the wind? You pass a broken hunting spear lying in the grass. It's rusted, wrapped in ivy. You can almost picture Actaeon's final moments, the confused thrashing, the betrayal in his dog's eyes. You wonder if any of them hesitated. Probably not. In Greek myth, nature doesn't pause for guilt. You walk on boots, brushing leaves aside. The glen fades into mist behind you, the sound of the stream receding like a memory. And still you're thinking about it, how easy it was for a man to become a beast. No dark magic, no demonic possession, just a flick of the divine wrist and a cruel joke on meat motion and memory. And ahead, the next tale will dive deeper into that hunger for punishment, spectacle and flesh, because Actaeon died quickly. Others do not. The trees open like a curtain into a wide, sun-bleached valley. In the centre stands a wooden structure, part temple, part theatre, part cage. The wind dies down, and even the birds seem to hush, as if what happened here long ago is too terrible to echo. You're now entering the story of Pentheus, a man who tried to deny the gods their dinner theatre and ended up as the entree. Pentheus, king of Thebes, was not a fan of new trends. especially the cult of Dionysus, the god of wine ecstasy and general rule-breaking. Dionysus came with drums, wild dances, unbrushed hair, and a growing fan base, especially among women. These were the Bacchae, his followers, who left their homes and husbands to dance in the forest, drink sacred wine, and connect with something deeper than society's rules. Pentheus saw this and thought absolutely not. He banned their gatherings, arrested Dionysus, which bold move, and publicly mocked the entire idea of divine intoxication. But Dionysus wasn't just any god. He didn't hurl thunderbolts or flood cities. He punished with performance. So he lures Pentheus into curiosity. He whispers that the Bacchae are doing scandalous things in the mountains, things a king might want to see. Pentheus, intrigued, disguises himself as a woman and sneaks into the forest to spy. But what he finds there isn't scandal, it's surrender. The Bacchae aren't orgiastic partiers. They're in trance. Wild, yes, but sacred. They've become more than human vessels of Dionysian madness, untamed and radiant. Then someone spots Pentheus. Dionysus, ever the director, ensures the next scene unfolds with dramatic precision. The Bacchae think Pentheus is a wild animal, maybe a lion, and leading them is Agave, Pentheus's own mother, so overtaken by frenzy she doesn't recognize her son. They attack. Pentheus is torn limb from limb by women dancing and singing and laughing. His mother, in divine madness, rips off his head and lifts it high, thinking it a trophy from the hunt. And later, when the trance fades and Agave sees what she's done, the horror arrives. No one eats the flesh here, but the transformation is no less beastly. These women, pushed past the limits of society and identity, become tools of a god's vengeance. The human becomes prey, the divine becomes performance, and the audience, that's you, quietly shivering beneath the weight of it all. Historians see this myth as a critique of rationality gone too far. Pentheus, too logical, too rigid, couldn't understand the divine ecstasy Dionysus offered. His refusal to surrender led to his destruction. The myth warns, deny the wild in yourself, and it may return with claws. Fringe thinkers, as always, have a take. Some see Pentheus as a scapegoat ritual, an echo of ancient kings being sacrificed to ensure the fertility of the land. Others read it as a gender inversion fantasy, where power structures collapse and roles dissolve, man to woman, king to beast, child to victim. You sit on a broken stone at the edge of the stage. A faint breeze stirs the dust, and for a moment you can almost hear the drums again. Feel the heat of torches. See the blur of feet dancing too fast to follow. The Bacchae aren't villains, nor are they heroes. They are reminders that what's wild in us doesn't vanish. It waits, just beneath the skin. And maybe what scares us most isn't that we might become animals, it's that we already are. You leave the theatre. The sky dims. Another shadow waits at the edge of the horizon. And in the next tale, the gods won't be content with metaphor. They'll want a bite. You leave the valley behind, and the path tilts downward into thickets of ivy and vine. The trees grow closer now, leaning in as if they've heard something unspeakable and are trying to muffle it. Your steps crunch on scattered bones, deer mostly. Maybe. Probably. But soon you see torches in the distance, flickering in clusters, laughing voices, wild off-key music, and just beyond that the sound of something tearing, not cloth, something wetter. This is where you meet the Bacchae again, but not the trance-like forest dance you just witnessed with Pentheus. No, this is something more primal. This is when the feast begins. In Dionysian, writes the Maenads, female followers of Dionysus weren't just dancers. They were predators. Possessed by divine frenzy, they could tear apart living animals with their bare hands. No knives, no tools, just teeth nails and an overpowering sense of cosmic permission. The act had a name, sparagmos, ritual dismemberment, a sacred act of ripping intended to dissolve the boundary between human and divine, between self and other, between body and symbol. Sometimes a bull was the victim, sometimes a goat. Sometimes, according to some whispered accounts, a man. Imagine it, dozens of people swirling around, shrieking praises to the god of madness, pulling a creature limb from limb, not out of cruelty but devotion. And then omophagia, the eating, raw, bloody, divine. Don't worry, you won't be offered a plate. But the act itself carries the essence of all the myths we've walked through so far. Eating meat becomes not just nutrition, it becomes transformation. The one who consumes changes. The one consumed is changed. Dionysus wasn't punishing his followers. He was freeing them. At least that's what they believed. And the wildest part. These rites weren't just stories. They happened. There are historical accounts from places like Thrace and Macedonia describing these rituals often with a blend of awe and disgust. Mainstream historians accept the rituals likely involved animal sacrifice and, yes, raw consumption. Whether humans were ever involved, that's still debated. Some fringe scholars argue that sparagmos and omophagia were dramatized myths, meant to make sense of war trauma, ritualized outlets for grief and rage. Others think they were symbolic, never literal. Still, the stories remain sticky with blood and meaning. And then, of course, there's the argument that Dionysian rites were never about savagery at all, but about reconnection. By dissolving the ego through madness, wine dance and flesh worshippers briefly stepped outside the human condition. They became animal god wind music all at once, terrifying, yes, but also deeply human. You sit beside a toppled statue of Dionysus, its eyes cracked smile worn soft by weather. At its feet are vines heavy with grapes bursting and purple-black. You pick one. Just one. You don't eat it. Yet. You think about how in Greek myth the gods almost never punish people for being animals. They punish people for pretending they aren't. Pentheus thought he could stay above the chaos. Actaeon thought he could observe without consequence. Lycaon thought he could serve sin and escape untouched. Every one of them lost their humanity not by embracing instinct, but by denying responsibility for it. Dionysus, he offers no such illusions. You're part beast, part divine. And the feast, it's not optional. You walk away from the torchlit circle. The vines part ahead, and a new figure waits on the horizon, larger-than-life fur hanging from his shoulders, club in hand. You've met the wild women. Next, it's time to meet a man who could break a lion's jaw with his bare hands and still be outdone by a pack of horses with a taste for human flesh. The path stiffens beneath your feet, packed earth gravel, crushed bone dust, leading you toward a place where even the trees lean away in caution. The air hums with a different kind of danger now. Less divine, more muscular. You're stepping into the world of Heracles, yes, that Heracles. Club-swinging, lion-wearing 12 labours Heracles. The kind of guy you don't want to bump into unless you're made of bronze or carrying backup. But tonight we're not talking about his greatest hits. We're not here for the Hydra or the golden apples. Tonight we're watching him meet a different kind of monster, not one with claws or poison breath, but one with a taste for something Heracles found truly horrifying: meat-eating horses. Welcome to the 8th labour. King Diomedes of Thrace owned a set of mares, beautiful, wild, powerful, and carnivorous. These weren't your typical hay munchers. These horses were fed flesh and not just dead animals. No Diomedes delighted in feeding them travellers, strangers, enemies, the kind of people who asked, "Hey, is there an inn around here?" There isn't. Heracles arrives, of course, with orders to capture the mares alive. Easier said than done. They're chained, snorting, frothing with madness. Some say they breathed fire. Others say their very hooves crushed the ground into sparks. But the key detail: they've lost all fear of humans because they associate humans with dinner. Now Heracles isn't just strong, he's smart, and also, when pushed, kind of savage. So what does he do? He feeds Diomedes to his own horses. Yes, the king who raised these monsters becomes their final snack. Once they've eaten their master, the horses suddenly chill out, calm, manageable. Maybe it was divine justice, or maybe they just needed closure. Either way, Heracles ropes them and leads them away. Historians still debate whether Diomedes' man-eating horses symbolize war trauma. After all, Thrace was known for its brutal cavalry. Some suggest the myth warns against raising tools of destruction you can't control. Others argue it's a metaphor for rulers whose hunger for violence turns on them in the end. The fringe camp, as always, gets weirder. One theory claims the horses represent unchecked greed, especially of tyrants who devour their people. Another insists this is a vegetarian parable smuggled into the heroic canon, a kind of ancient don't feed animals meat PSA with a legendary spokesperson. You squat near a patch of scorched earth where hoofprints far too large are fossilized into the soil. You imagine the snorting breath, the bloodied teeth, the eyes glazed. not from rage but diet, and Heracles wiping sweat from his brow, wondering what exactly these labours are meant to teach him. What makes this tale different from others is the inversion of roles. Usually humans fear being eaten by monsters, but here it's horses, domesticated animals made monstrous by man's cruelty. And Heracles. He doesn't try to cleanse them, doesn't beg the gods to fix it, he just flips the equation. You raise beasts, you become food. There's something unsettling about how easily the horses switch from chaos to calm, as if their madness was never natural, as if the only curse was the man who fed them. And so, you move on, the scent of ash and hay trailing behind. Ahead, the hills flatten into open fields, a perfect place to graze, or to hunt. But don't relax just yet, because in the next tale you'll find that feeding flesh to animals might not just be immoral. It might be the beginning of your end. You step out onto the plain where the grass grows coarse and dry, and the sky stretches wide like a tired yawn. The wind is quiet here, but not calm, just holding its breath. There's no scent of laurel or honey or incense, only salt. Sea salt, because now you're sailing, or rather you're clinging to a splintering plank in the story of Odysseus, whose post-war cruise turns into a greatest hits album of how not to travel. Tonight we drop anchor at the island of Telepailos, home of the Laestrygonians giants with one culinary preference strangers. Odysseus fresh off, surviving a few minor inconveniences like a decade-long war and losing most of his friends spots land and thinks finally. A break. He sends a scouting party inland. The rest of the crew pulls the ships into a narrow harbour surrounded by cliffs. The scouts find a nice town. Quaint quiet. A girl leads them to the palace of King Antiphates. The kind of palace where you should definitely keep your shoes on and maybe bring a spear just in case. When they arrive, Antiphates doesn't offer bread or wine. He grabs one of the men like someone choosing a chicken at a market and eats him. Just straight up devours him on the spot. The other two scouts run, and then the Laestrygonians rise. They're not just big, they're fast. Before the sailors can even shout the cliffs around, the harbour are filled with boulders, spears and snarling teeth. The Laestrygonians hurl stones the size of wagons down onto the ships. Masts snap, hulls explode, men scream, disappear under red-tinged waves. Only Odysseus's ship, which stayed outside the narrow bay, escapes. The rest gone. Turned from soldiers into soup ingredients in about 5 minutes. And you thought delayed flights were bad. This moment is a turning point in the Odyssey. Odysseus loses 11 ships. Dozens, maybe hundreds of men. In a single scene. No heroics, no clever tricks, just instant carnage. And why? Because someone docked in the wrong cove. Historians have long debated the symbolism of the Laestrygonians. Some say they represent primal fear, strangers in a strange land confronted with inhuman appetite. Others believe the tale is a veiled warning against imperial overreach, wander too far into unknown cultures and you might be what's for dinner. Fringe scholars get extra chewy here. One camp believes the Laestrygonians were inspired by real encounters with isolated tribes, larger in stature, unfamiliar, and painted as monsters by terrified sailors. Another insists they're psychological stand-ins for the trauma of war, how soldiers once confident and victorious become helpless prey in the wrong context. But perhaps most chilling is the sheer speed of it all. There's no negotiation, no pleading. The Laestrygonians don't talk, they eat. You go from let's ask for directions to, oh no, Jim's been swallowed whole in seconds. You sit now at the edge of a cliff overlooking the imagined harbour. The waves below slap the rocks like lazy hands. You can almost see the shattered wreckage drifting under the surface. A mast here, a shield there. Someone's helmet bobbing once then gone. There's something deeply Greek about how food and destruction intertwine here. The Laestrygonians don't just kill, they consume. In doing so, they erase. Eating is final. It leaves no story, no bones, no mourning. And Odysseus. He doesn't dwell. He sails on. Maybe because he can't face what just happened. Or maybe because deep down he knows this isn't the last time hunger will come for him, in mythic form. You rise from the cliff. The sun is low now, flattening everything in gold and shadow. The sea behind you murmurs the names of the lost. And up ahead, another island, another meal, another mistake. The sea is calm now, deceptively gentle, like it hasn't just devoured 11 ships and countless men. Odysseus's single surviving vessel glides silently over glassy water, the crew too stunned to speak. You ride with them past jagged coastlines and windless skies until an island rises in the distance, lush green promising. But you've heard that promise before. This is the land of Aiea, and at its centre lives someone whose welcome comes with a tail, or tusks, or snout. This is the tale of Circe the sorceress, who didn't need teeth to turn men into beasts, just a bit of potion, a hint of meat, and the wrong kind of hospitality. Odysseus and his men desperate for rest spot smoke curling above the trees. He sends a group of sailors inland to investigate while he hangs back. It's a habit he's developed to stay near the ship, just in case things get carnivorous again. The scouting party finds a grand home, all polished stone and herb-scented air. Circe greets them warmly, unusually warm for someone living alone on an enchanted island. She offers food and drink, and her voice is soft, almost musical. The men, hungry and naive, accept. And here's the twist: Circe doesn't kill them. She feeds them. Roast meats, rich wine platters piled high with delicacies, probably the best meal they've had in weeks. But the wine is spiked, and the moment they finish their feast, she transforms them into pigs. Real ones. Bristly, squealing, confused. Still vaguely human in thought, but no longer in form. Circe doesn't gloat. She doesn't even seem angry. She simply herds them into a pen, feeds them slop, shakes her head like a disappointed teacher. There's almost a tragic kindness in her eyes. Odysseus hears of this thanks to the one crewman who ran and does what he does best, plays it cool, then makes a scene. But this time he gets help. Hermes, the messenger god, appears and hands him a magical herb moly which renders Circe's spells useless. Armed with immunity and a sword, Odysseus confronts Circe. She tries to enchant him. It doesn't work. He doesn't turn. For the first time, someone resists. And Circe, surprisingly, is impressed. She releases the men, feeds them again real food this time, restores their human forms, and then Odysseus and his crew stay for a year. Yes, an entire year of we should probably leave tomorrow while enjoying enchanted baths and roast dinners, and probably not fighting monsters. Historians see Circe as one of Greek mythology's most complex women. Not villain, not heroine. She punishes greed, yes, but not with death. She forces men to live with what they become, what they already are. And only when they show restraint, respect, maybe even humility, does she give them back their shape. There's endless debate over what the pigs actually represent. Some say it's about indulgence. Others read it as commentary on how men behave when no longer bound by war. Circe doesn't create beasts. She reveals them. Fringe scholars go further, arguing that Circe wasn't punishing the sailors at all. They see her as a healer, using transformation as a symbolic detox, forcing them to face their base nature before they can return to the world. A mythological rehab centre, essentially with better catering. You pause near a grove of oak trees, their trunks etched with old symbols. One resembles a pig, another a spiral Circe's mark. There's a stone bowl nearby, still crusted with the remains of something herbal aromatic. You imagine the sorceress mixing potions and muttering incantations, not in anger but in weary understanding. Because maybe Circe isn't the danger here. Maybe the danger is what men do with power hunger and the illusion of safety. Odysseus eventually sails away, of course, but not unchanged. He's seen what happens when appetites rule, and he's not done learning, because soon he'll face another meal, one that will cost him everything. The sails catch a restless wind as Odysseus and his newly de-squealed crew leave Aiea behind. Circe's island shrinks on the horizon, but her lesson clings to the ship like mist. Indulgence will always demand its due. The sea ahead is calm, but your gut tightens. You know by now that in Greek myth, calm seas are just the gods holding their breath. Odysseus doesn't sail blind. Circe, before letting him go, offers advice. Warnings, really. About what lies ahead. About Scylla and Charybdis, yes, but also about Helios's sacred cattle grazing on the island of Thrinacia. Whatever you do, she says, don't eat them. Simple enough, right? You follow the ship to the shore of Thrinacia, an island bathed in golden sunlight, its fields rippling with long grass. And there lazily chewing and lowing are the cattle of the sun god Helios. Beautiful creatures, almost glowing, untouchable. Circe and the prophet Tiresias had both warned, don't touch the cows, don't kill them, don't even look at them too hungrily. Helios doesn't mess around, those are his sacred animals. To eat one is to offend the very rhythm of the cosmos. But Odysseus's crew is tired, starving, storm-bound for a month. The food stores dwindle. Odysseus prays to the gods, and because he's a responsible hero, falls asleep in a field. That's when his men make the fatal decision. Led by Eurylochus, they sneak off and butcher the divine cows, the sun god's living treasures. Roasted over open flame, the smell must have been heavenly. Sacrilegious brisket, forbidden steak. The moment the meat hits their tongues, the myth seals itself. Even the hides of the cows start crawling across the floor. Yes, you heard that right. The skinned hides begin to move slithering in protest. The gods are watching. When Odysseus wakes and learns what's happened, it's too late. He's furious. Grieving even. But the sky's already darkening. Helios demands retribution. If Zeus doesn't punish them, Helios threatens to shine no more. That's divine extortion. And so, when Odysseus and his men finally leave Thrinacia, Zeus destroys the ship with a thunderbolt. Everyone dies. Everyone except Odysseus. He clings to a piece of wreckage and floats alone, drifting on the endless sea. The rest gone. Not even bones left to bury. No glory. No hero's end. Just hunger that led to ruin. Historians look at this moment as one of the clearest moral tales in the Odyssey. The warning is obvious: respect the gods, respect boundaries, know that some things, no matter how tempting, are not yours to take. Fringe interpretations dig deeper. Some claim the cattle represent time itself. Helios being the god of the sun and killing them disrupts the sacred order. Others see it as a metaphor for overconsumption, the constant human urge to take more even when warned. You stand now on a ghostly shoreline, gazing at an empty spit where meat once sizzled. The air smells faintly of ashen brine. A breeze stirs the long grass, and you almost expect the cows to return, not grazing, but glowing, watching. Because in Greek myth, punishment isn't always swift. Sometimes it's slow and creeping. Sometimes it waits until you think you've gotten away with it. But no one escapes a divine kitchen crime, especially not with barbecue sauce on their hands. You walk away from the shore Odysseus' solitary journey echoing in your mind. He survives, but he doesn't escape. And soon the stories will turn darker, because sometimes the punishment isn't turning into a beast. It's being forced to remember everything you did as a human. Night gathers over the wreckage-strewn sea as you drift alone with Odysseus, the last plank under your fingertips, slick with salt. Ahead, jagged rocks rise like broken teeth, hemming a channel so narrow it seems carved by a vindictive god. On the port side, a whirlpool churns dark water, spiralling down a throat that never fills. On starboard, a cliff face riddled with shadowed caves looms close enough to scrape oar tips. You've reached the strait between Scylla and Charybdis, a place sailors still curse in their sleep. Circe warned about this gauntlet too. Hug the rocks, she'd said, and dash past quickly. Better to lose a few men to Scylla's snap than everyone to Charybdis's maw. Hard advice, like choosing between a dentist who bites and one who swallows whole. Odysseus, bruised by thunder and grief, lashes what's left of his raft to a makeshift mast. You clutch the edge beside him, feeling every shudder as the current drags you toward doom's double feature. The sky cracks with dull lightning, the kind that flickers behind clouds like distant paparazzi. Somewhere overhead, Helios's glare is undoubtedly still simmering. Then a hiss, wet, gurgling, hungry. 6 serpentine necks slither from a cliffside cleft. Each head is a nightmare composite dog jaws, eel eyes, triple-rowed teeth framed by matted manes that drip brine and gore. Scylla. She lunges and time slows to a single heartbeat. Odysseus tries to shout orders, but the words die in sea spray. You remember Circe's counsel. Don't fight her, just move. Yet instinct pins your feet, because how do you ignore 6 sets of fangs the size of blacksmith tongs? Scylla snaps down 1, 2, 3 sailors gone in a blur. They don't even scream. The shock steals their voices before the teeth can. Odysseus thrusts his spear, but strikes only stone. You glimpse a sandal spinning in midair, then vanishing into the froth. Somewhere below, Charybdis gurgles as though applauding the appetizer. Mainstream historians identify this strait with the Strait of Messina, between Sicily and mainland Italy, notorious for treacherous currents even today. Mediterranean mariners mapped it with skull-shaped icons, a cartographic shrug that said, "Abandon hope, or at least pack a life vest." But Scylla's origins blur myth and metaphor. Historians still argue whether she was ever worshipped as a minor sea goddess, or merely feared as a cautionary tale against reckless navigation. Some early temples feature carvings that look suspiciously like six-headed hounds. Others insist they're just badly weathered dolphins. A quirky fringe tidbit, an 18th century Sicilian fisher legend, claims tossing a loaf of stale bread smeared with goat fat into the current would distract Scylla's puppies. Picture that centuries of sailors bribing a multi-headed sea demon with half-priced carbs. Back on the raft, you feel the hull jerk sideways, Charybdis inhaling. Water rushes past in a roaring hush, pulling splinters and seaweed toward the whirlpool's glossy eye. Odysseus barks for everyone to row starboard, but half the oars are gone, snapped or swallowed. Somewhere off the stern, a sailor prays to gods, probably tired of hearing from him. Scylla strikes again, plucking another man. That's 5. One head gnashes empty air where you stood seconds earlier, rank breath hot as forge smoke. The rafters shift their weight instinctively starboard edging closer to Charybdis's suction. It's a lethal waltz, one step too far left teeth, one step too far right oblivion. Odysseus makes the brutal calculation hued by Hydra dog beats being sucked into an ocean blender. He braces the tiller against the cliff, grinding wood against rock sparks, spitting into mist. 2 more heads lunge, but snag nothing, only echoes. In a heartbeat, the raft slips free of the cavern's reach. Scylla's screech rattles, stone frustrated and still ravenous, but distance is mercy. Charybdis, failing to catch fresh wreckage, belches a geyser of brine that soaks the survivors like cheap baptism. Silence returns well as silent as any place haunted by chewing sounds and watery gulps. Odysseus counts heads. 6 lost, the maximum Circe predicted. He sets his jaw grief-folded behind iron resolve because morning can wait until land. You sit beside a mastless beam heart hammering. The sea ahead is open, but every creak reminds you of invisible teeth. You wonder why the gods choose monstrous shapes for their punishments. Maybe claws and maws are just divine shorthand for actions have consequences. Or maybe the old stories simply knew that nothing snaps a listener awake like the threat of being devoured mid-sentence. There's academic debate about Scylla's symbolism. Some scholars read her as the embodiment of rocky shoals, an anthropomorphic navigation chart. Others see a darker allegory, 6 heads for the 6 months. Sailors were traditionally away from home, each devouring a slice of their lives. Fringe theorists. They're busy linking Scylla to fertility cults. Don't ask or speculating, she represents pre-Greek sea monster deities, absorbed into the Olympian PR machine. Yet one feeling cuts through all theories' helpless awe. You can't bargain with hunger that ancient. You can only steer carefully and hope the tally of losses is survivable. The battered raft limps onward, every survivor clutching a story no one on Ithaca will believe. You breathe salt, feel your pulse slow, and realize the lessons Scylla teaches better than any classroom. Some dangers you navigate, others you endure. But don't roll that up into a neat moral yet, because the mythic menu still has courses to serve gluttons, punished monsters fed gods, appeased, and mortals reminded they're just walking entrees in the cosmic banquet. You lie back against warped planks staring at a sky suddenly littered with indifferent stars, and think of Circe's final warning echoing in your ears. The greatest hunger is the one you refuse to admit you have. Ahead, calm water gleams like black glass. But beneath shadows flicker perhaps memories of jaws left behind, or omens of new ones forming. Either way, the voyage continues. Dawn slides across the sea like butter on a hot pan, slow golden and deceptive in its gentleness. After surviving Scylla and Charybdis, Odysseus should feel triumphant. But instead there's a quiet dullness behind his eyes, the way a man looks when he knows the worst isn't behind him. It's just hiding. You move with him back on solid ground now. But this island, whatever it's called, feels wrong. Too quiet. The kind of silence that hums like something waiting to be triggered. You've heard a lot about meat in these myths, how it tempts, punishes, transforms. But here, in this dusty little story, nobody bothers to put on the tourist brochures the lesson sharpens. You're about to meet Phineus, a king, punished not for what he ate, but for how he used hunger to control others. Phineus was once a man of great power. A seer, some say a prophet who spoke truths too sharp for Olympus' liking. His punishment, endless meals he could never enjoy. Enter the Harpies. Every day servants would lay a lavish feast before him, Roasted meats, honey-glazed birds, fruit soaked in nectar. Just as Phineas reached for a bite, the harpies would descend. Half woman, half bird, all chaos. They didn't just steal the food, they defiled it. Left it spoiled, smeared, inedible. A feast turned to filth every single day. Imagine that. Sitting at a table set with golden ivory, your belly hollow, and every bite stolen or ruined by winged rage. Hunger sharpened by hope, then crushed. That's its own kind of beast. Phineas doesn't transform physically, but you don't need feathers or hooves to be undone. You watch him wither in this story body intact, but mind gnawed raw by deprivation. A man tormented, not by monsters of fang and claw, but by a promise denied over and over again. Eventually he's saved. The Argonauts arrive, yes, that band of pre-Odysseus Greek heroes, and two of them, wing-footed Zetes and Calais, chase off the harpies. They strike a deal with the gods the harpies won't return, but Phineas must give up eating entirely. No more torment, but no more pleasure either. Clean, quiet starvation, dignified decay. Historians point to the harpies as moral enforcers, messengers of divine wrath. But they're not evil, they're bound, sent to enforce a sentence. That's what makes them worse hunger not as chaos, but as bureaucracy. Fringe scholars have a field day here. One theory claims Phineas symbolizes political corruption using prophecy to manipulate his punishment, reflecting what he denied others. Another sees the harpies as ancient metaphors for disease, a body's rejection of nourishment. But what lingers isn't analysis. It's the visual of a man every day sitting down to a table he never gets to eat from. That's more terrifying than any Cyclops. And then there's the deeper truth beneath the feathers. You don't need to become a beast to live like one. You stand now in a clearing where broken goblets dot the ground like forgotten prayers. A wooden table lies rotted at the centre, vines curling through plates still dusted with crumbs and crust. Something buzzes in the air, not flies, but memory. Hunger unfinished. The harpies don't live here anymore, but the taste of their work remains. You walk past the ghostly dining hall, careful not to disturb the plates. Even now, centuries later, they look like they're waiting. You wonder what it means to have hunger used against you. Not to be devoured, but denied. To be turned not into meat, but a creature that can smell it, see it, feel the warmth rise from it, and never touch it. Maybe that's why Greek myth feared hunger more than death. Death is quick, hunger lingers. It humbles, it hollows. You keep walking, and up ahead the land splits again between stable paths and stories that go off the rails entirely. Because what's next isn't denial, it's indulgence, a man who feeds others to beasts, and finds himself on the menu. The trail darkens beneath your feet, not with shade, but with history. Cracked bones, hoof prints sunk too deep into stone, the remnants of chains so heavy they've fused with the ground. You've reached the next tale. And this time, the beasts aren't just metaphor. They're real snorting, wild-eyed and worse-trained. This is the story of Heracles' man-eating horses, also known as the mares of Diomedes, one of the lesser-known but no less blood-soaked labours in his Herculean resume. You remember Heracles' right? Lion pelt, big club, no patience. For his 8th labour, Heracles was sent to Thrace, where King Diomedes kept a set of magnificent horses. Huge, powerful, faster than wind over wine-dark sea. There was just one problem: they ate people. Not accidentally. Not during a war or out of desperation. No, this was their diet. Diomedes, whose hobbies apparently included monarchy and madness, fed them human flesh. Strangers, enemies, slaves, even unlucky servants. The stables reeked of iron and ash. You didn't visit unless you were either the feeder or the feed. Heracles arrives, he sees the horses, hears the bones crunching. He understands the assignment. Now he could have just wrangled them, tied them up, dragged them back to Mycenae and crossed the labour off his to-do list. But this is Heracles. He doesn't do subtle. He goes straight to the source of the problem. So he feeds Diomedes to his own horses. It's grim, efficient, and a little poetic. The beasts that had been force-fed the innocent now get a taste of the man responsible, and just like that they calm down. Their madness breaks. Their hunger settles. Heracles binds them easily, leads them away. No more snarling, no more blood. Just silence. Historians have long debated this myth's deeper meanings. Some say it reflects early Greek anxieties about the loss of control, what happens when tools of power like horses or armies turn against you. Others think it's a morality tale about tyranny, a warning that cruelty always circles back around to bite its source. The fringe theorists naturally turn up with torches and scrolls. One camp argues that the horses were never literal, just symbols of warfare consuming youth and labour with kingly encouragement. Another insists the myth was a coded anti-cannibalism parable spread in regions where older rituals involving human flesh were being erased from culture. But let's zoom back in. Picture Heracles wind-whipped and smeared in dirt, standing before 4 monstrous horses with red-stained teeth. He doesn't flinch, just opens the gates, lifts a struggling king into the air, and offers him to the animals as casually as one might feed pigeons breadcrumbs. It's not about vengeance, not for Heracles, it's about balance. The moment the unnatural act ends, the beasts become natural again, which says something unsettling. Maybe the horses weren't monsters to begin with. Maybe they were just shaped by the man who fed them. And once that influence is gone, they're just horses again. You walk past their old paddock, long overgrown now, but the ground still holds the memory. Hooves pressed deep into the soil, splinters of bone where iron shoes once struck down in hunger. A broken gate, one hinge rusted and twisted, like a jaw held open too long. You sit for a moment listening. You don't hear rage or screams, just wind and something else, something like regret. Because these myths, as beastly as they get, always lead you back to this same whisper. What we become is shaped by what we're fed physically, emotionally, morally. And those who feed others cruelty eventually end up on the menu. You stand. The air is cooler now, and ahead another legend looms where a feast becomes prophecy, and punishment comes not in claws but in flames and fate. The road winds toward a sunlit coast, deceptively peaceful. Birds circle overhead, the waves lapping at the sand, like they've never drowned a sailor in their lives. But you know better by now. This stretch of myth has teeth, and today they're wrapped in a prophecy. This is the final act of the Mares of Diomedes, but it's also more than that. It's about the end of the line for the monsters we raise, and how their hunger doesn't vanish when the bodies do. After Heracles fed King Diomedes to his own bloodthirsty horses and led the now docile animals away, he returned to Mycenae, his labour complete. The mares were stabled there, calmer now, but never quite normal. The gods had other plans. In most versions of the myth, these horses were eventually released, either by the gods or by Heracles himself. Some say they wandered off and were eaten by wild beasts. Others claim they were set free to roam Mount Olympus, becoming part of the divine herd. And a few versions insist they were offered up as sacrifices to Zeus, a trade of flesh for peace. But here's where things get strange. One tradition says that Alexander the Great's horse Bucephalus was a descendant of Diomedes' mares. Now that's almost certainly poetic license Greek historians loved, tying contemporary heroes to mythic bloodlines, but still the idea lingers even tamed monsters pass something on. Even peaceful hooves echo with past hungers. Which brings us to the heart of this tale. You can kill a beast, but you can't always kill what it represents. Diomedes' mistake wasn't just feeding human flesh to horses. It was building a system where hunger was satisfied by cruelty, where power was enforced with carnage. And once that's set in motion, it takes more than one good man to end it. Heracles, for all his muscles and hero credits, didn't fix anything long-term. He ended an incident, not a cycle. Historians often point to this labour as symbolic. The horses represent the unchecked appetites of tyrants. Diomedes didn't just train beasts, he normalized consumption, made brutality casual, taught others to look at a person and see meat. Fringe scholars go one step wilder, of course. Some argue this myth grew from real-life rituals involving animals fed human remains, not necessarily as acts of cruelty, but as attempts to transfer spiritual power. The flesh of enemies made into sacrament. It's a theory that makes you pause before romanticizing ancient feasts too much. There's a stone pen near the beach crumbling with age. Vines have threaded through the cracks. You sit on the gate where a bronze latch once held back monsters fed by command. The silence here feels tight. Not mournful, just unfinished. You wonder what became of those who fed the mares, the stable hands, the guards, the ones who looked away every time the meat arrived. You don't know. Myths rarely tell you what happened to the background characters, but you suspect they didn't walk away clean. And maybe that's the point. The story of Diomedes and his horses isn't about beasts. It's about what happens when we turn others into things. Meat tools, trophies. It's about what we feed in others and in ourselves and whether we're willing to own what grows from it. As the tide rolls in, you rise. The sand glitters with the kind of stillness that feels staged, like the world holding its pose before the next myth begins. And sure enough, it does, because up ahead another fire is crackling. This time it's divine punishment in a very public kitchen. And someone's about to find out what happens when you eat the wrong god's cows. The wind turns warm again, laced with salt and the faint scent of something roasted. Not food, not exactly. It smells like the aftermath of a feast smoke fat regret. You're sailing once more beside Odysseus, and this time the meal in question won't be eaten by monsters. It'll be eaten by men against all better judgment, and the consequences will come from above. We're back at the island of Thrinacia, a place we visited once before, the land of Helios, the sun god, and his divine cattle. Remember those, the radiant cows, flawless immortal, and most importantly, absolutely not for eating. Circe warned Odysseus. Tiresias, the blind prophet, warned him too. Even Zeus, through dreams and signs, made the rules clear. Touch those cows and you're done. So naturally, the men touch the cows. The setup is almost cruel. Odysseus and his crew are stranded on Thrinacia by storms. Supplies dwindle. The gods, it seems, are testing the limits of patience and stomachs. For a while, the men hold fast. They fish, they complain, they fast, they grumble. Then one day, while Odysseus is praying, and crucially napping, his second-in-command, Eurylochus, makes the worst motivational speech in Greek literature. Better to die with full bellies, he says, than starve slowly while divine cows graze right next to you, after all they've sacrificed to the gods before. Surely a few steaks won't bring the sky down. You can practically hear Helios warming up his smiting hand. The men slaughter the cattle, roast them on open flames and feast. The meat sizzles. The air fills with sacred aroma. They eat for 6 days straight. But it's on the 7th, a mythic number, that things turn. The hides crawl? Yes. The cows' skins begin to twitch and slither on the ground. The meat moves. Smoke rises in unnatural patterns. The heavens stir. And then Helios complains to Zeus. Not lightly, not subtly. He threatens to stop shining. That's right, the sun god goes on strike. If you let this pass, he says, I'll take my light to the underworld and leave the living in the dark. Zeus, tired of customer service, responds with his favourite button lightning bolt. Odysseus and the crew set sail, the wind suddenly compliant. But then the sky darkens. A single strike from the heavens shatters the ship. It splits like kindling. Mast gone. Sail gone. Men gone. Odysseus clings to a broken plank alone again, drifting through the debris of divine disobedience. Historians often point to this tale as a ritual warning. Respect offerings, respect omens, and respect boundaries. The divine cows weren't just animals, they were property of a god. Crossing that line, even in desperation, wasn't just theft, it was sacrilege. But there's more under the surface. Some scholars read this moment as a metaphor for the collapse of discipline. The crew's inability to delay gratification leads to their annihilation. Others see it as a nod to the fragility of human loyalty. Even in Odysseus's famously long-suffering band of men, one barbecue is all it takes to undo 10 years of survival. Fringe interpretations dig in deeper. Some suggest the story encodes solar worship taboos, with the cows representing sun cycles or sacred time. Others think the crawling hides symbolize the soul's rejection of improperly honored death. The food doesn't stay still because it was never meant to be food. You stand now beside a blackened fire pit, its stones cracked by heat. Scorch marks stretch out like fingers across the soil. No bones remain. Divine cows don't leave remains when punished. But the earth here feels fragile, like it remembers being caught between hunger and holiness. And Odysseus, he floats alone, again. Punished not just by the gods, but by the weight of leadership, by knowing he couldn't stop them. That sometimes being right isn't enough. You step back from the pit. The clouds overhead are thicker now, tinted red in the fading light. They look like smoke rising from a long-dead feast. And somewhere beyond them, a god is still chewing on the idea that someone dared snack on what was sacred. But don't lose your appetite just yet. The menu still has teeth. Because next we meet beings who feast on you not from hunger, but from instinct. The skies are quiet now. Too quiet. Not the peace after chaos kind, but the unsettling calm that happens before something bares its teeth. You're no longer with Odysseus. You've drifted somewhere stranger, darker. the kind of place where shadows crawl and eyes glow without faces. This is where you meet the Empusa creatures who don't eat to live. They eat because it's what they are. You step into the dusk of a rocky hillside. The earth here is cracked sharp as if split open by something trying to get out or in. The air smells faintly of iron and ash, and then you hear it, the soft clink of jewellery, the flutter of silk, and beneath that, the faint squelch of something wet. The Empusa is approaching. In Greek myth, the Empusae are shapeshifters, vampiric spirits sent by Hecate, goddess of witchcraft and crossroads. They're described in fragments sometimes as hags, sometimes seductive women with one leg of brass and one of a donkey. Always strange, always hungry. They lure men, often travellers, with beauty or pity. A woman alone in the dark. A lost girl sobbing near the road. You approach, you offer help, and suddenly teeth. The Empusa eats flesh, yes, but her real appetite is for blood. She drains the body slowly, lovingly. Some myths say she even feasts on the spirit, hollowing her victim out like a melon rind, and leaving only the illusion of a person behind. And what's truly eerie, they don't always kill. Sometimes the victim wakes up alive, but changed, thin, shaken, eyes hollow, sleep broken. The ancient Greeks called that Empusa visitation, blaming these creatures for sleep paralysis and mysterious fevers. The vampire myth long before fangs and capes starts right here, on a dusty Greek hillside, with something beautiful that eats you smiling. Historians still argue whether the Empusae were actual folk demons or literary devices. Some believe they were invented to scare children and men into staying home at night. Others say they evolved from older Mesopotamian or Anatolian spirits that merged into Greek, thought like phantoms hitching a cultural ride. Fringe scholars have more delicious takes. One theory links them to ritual bloodletting practices where trance states and visions were explained away as being visited. Another claims the Empusae are metaphors for emotional vampires, people who drain your soul slowly while smiling. Either way, they represent a shift in our feast-themed tour. Earlier myths punished people for eating others. But now we meet monsters who eat because it's all they've ever known. And they don't devour out of anger or vengeance. They do it because you came close. You sit near a flat stone slab, maybe once an altar, maybe just a place where someone lay down and never got back up. The dusk thickens. You hear what might be footsteps, might be hooves. You don't turn to look. The Empusa doesn't always come in full. Sometimes it's just a whisper, a cold breath, a dream that leaves you waking hungry for something you don't remember asking for. Greek myths were full of monsters with rules. Scylla had 6 heads, the Minotaur had a maze, but the Empusae, they had no logic. They appear, they feed, they vanish. Their only pattern is hunger. You rise from the stone, brushing off dust that feels older than memory. Behind you a flicker of gold, the shimmer of a brass foot maybe. Maybe not. And ahead, a different kind of hunger still simmers. One locked in a labyrinth, one raised on human flesh until it forgot how to be anything else. So tread lightly, because next we meet a beast that wasn't born hungry. He was made that way. The wind shifts again, hot, stale and dry. You smell stone dust and the faint trace of something sour like meat, left out too long in a sunlit corridor. You're no longer near the sea or the woods. You're walking down into the labyrinth. This is the domain of the Minotaur, perhaps the most famous meat-eater in Greek mythology. And what makes him terrifying isn't just his appetite, it's that he wasn't born a monster. He was made. The story begins, as most Greek nightmares do, with a god's insult and a king's pride. King Minos of Crete asked Poseidon to send him a sign to prove his divine right to rule. Poseidon obliges, raising from the sea a perfect white bull. Magnificent, unmistakably divine. The deal was sacrifice the bull in Poseidon's honour. Minos doesn't. He keeps the bull. Too beautiful, too rare, too tempting to give up. Poseidon, as we've seen, does not take betrayal lightly. So he curses pacifier Minos' queen with a desire so unnatural, even modern mythology buffs squirm a little. She falls hopelessly, obsessively in love with the bull. Not with a man dressed as a bull. Not with a metaphor. The actual bull. She enlists the help of deedless genius inventor and maker of terrible ideas to build a wooden cow costume hollow, wheeled anatomically, convincing. Let's skip ahead. Pasiphae conceives a child, half man, half bull, and from the moment he's born he is wrong, not evil, just cursed. He cannot speak, he cannot connect. He grows quickly, powerfully, and soon, dangerously. Minos, horrified, commissions Daedalus to construct a maze beneath the palace, a labyrinth inescapable. The Minotaur is locked inside, out of sight, out of mythic mind. But monsters eat, and the Minotaur, trapped in dark tunnels with no herd, no pasture, no warmth, begins to crave what's available. Meat, specifically human. So Minos comes up with a grotesque solution. Every 9 years, Athens must send 7 boys and 7 girls, young, unarmed, terrified, to Crete as tribute. They are cast into the labyrinth where they wander, panic scream, and eventually are found. The Minotaur feasts. It's not hunting, not strategy, just hunger in a maze, an echo that learns your footsteps and moves toward them. This goes on until Theseus arrives, the Prince of Athens, strong-jawed, story-ready. He volunteers as tribute, intending not to be eaten. With the help of Minos' daughter Ariadne, who gives him a ball of thread, and her heart, Theseus enters the labyrinth, finds the beast, and kills it. Sword through the gut, a thud in the dark, and then silence. The Minotaur dies, but the story, it doesn't end there. Historians argue what the Minotaur meant. Was he a symbol of foreign oppression, a critique of Cretan dominance over mainland Greece, or a psychological metaphor for desire gone monstrous, the literal child of lust and disobedience? Fringe thinkers get wonderfully lost in this maze. Some say the labyrinth represents the human mind, and the Minotaur is our shadow self, the beast we hide but cannot unmake. Others see him as a stand-in for sacrificial rituals, a memory of ancient rites where children were offered to chthonic gods beneath the earth. But the part that lingers isn't the sword. It's the sound, the echo of feet in stone corridors, the thump of something massive moving just out of sight, and the fact that the Minotaur never chose his hunger. He was raised on it, built to crave what should never have been given. You stand now at the edge of a crumbled stone passage. The air inside is cool stale. You imagine the sound of thread unravelling behind you, a thin lifeline back to safety. And far within a memory of a boy who never asked to be half anything, who only ever knew darkness and the sound of breathing that wasn't his own. Sometimes meat turns men into beasts, and sometimes men turn beasts into monsters just to justify feeding them. You back away from the passage. The light outside is brighter now, but not comforting. You know better. Because even with the Minotaur gone, the next creature you'll meet doesn't need a maze. She only needs a question. You emerge from the echoing dark of the labyrinth, your ears still ringing with the imagined sound of hoofbeats and thread unspooling. The air outside is sharper now, brighter, but that doesn't mean safer. It means clarity. And clarity in myth often comes with sharp edges. You walk uphill stone beneath your feet, turning smooth and warm with the midday sun. And there ahead of you lies a peculiar sight, a throne carved into the rock, and next to it the crumbling paws of something long gone but not forgotten. You've arrived at the home of the Sphinx, not the Egyptian one, the Greek version. She's smaller, stranger, and vastly more personal. No pyramids, just riddles, bones, and silence. She doesn't need a labyrinth to trap you. She only needs your mind. The Sphinx sat outside Thebes where a curse had settled like mildew. She asked one riddle to every traveller who passed. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening? You know this one. Everyone does now. But back then this riddle was a killer. Get it wrong and the Sphinx would pounce. Not just maul you, devour you. Jaws wide, claws already red. Her hunger wasn't random. It was earned. Because in her mind, if you couldn't answer the question, you had no business surviving the journey. Victim after victim fell fed to her hunger for wrong answers and the weight of metaphor. Until one day, a stranger arrived Oedipus. He answers man. As a baby he crawls on 4. As an adult he walks on 2. In old age he leans on a cane 3 legs. Correct. The Sphinx, enraged and defeated, does something rarely seen in myth. She destroys herself. Some say she leaps from a cliff. Others say she turns to stone. But either way, the riddle dies with her. Now let's peel back the symbolism. The Sphinx doesn't eat because she's hungry. She eats because it's her function. She is the test, the barrier, the final exam in the form of a mythological lion-bird-woman hybrid. Her meat is symbolic. To be devoured by her is to be judged unworthy of continuation. Historians interpret her in layers. On the surface, she's a guardian figure, an import from Egyptian tradition repurposed into something more philosophical. Others see her as a remnant of older goddess cults, twisted by time into a puzzle and punishment hybrid. Fringe scholars take it further. Some propose the Sphinx represents time itself, her riddle a metaphor for the arc of life. To be eaten by her is to be erased from the timeline. To answer her is to transcend mortality, if only temporarily. And there's another interpretation more psychological, that the Sphinx is the internal voice of self-doubt. Her riddle is what we ask ourselves every time we change, grow, or age. What am I now? What was I before? What happens next? But back to the meat. You see, the Sphinx didn't eat indiscriminately. She dined only on those who couldn't answer. In that way, she's the inverse of the Minotaur. He ate because he was locked away. She ate because she was given permission in the form of failure. Which leads to an unsettling question: how many monsters in Greek myth were simply doing their jobs? You stand beside the fallen throne where wind has carved away all but the suggestion of a face. There are bones in the dust here, fragments ancient and dry, not just symbols. Someone once failed this test. You wonder, if you stood before the Sphinx, would you have passed? And more importantly, what question would she ask you? Because the old riddle is gone now, solved, dead with her. But you suspect if she ever rose again, her new riddle wouldn't be about legs. It would be about hunger, about what you'd sacrifice to survive, and what kind of beast you'd become in the process. You leave the ruins behind, but you don't feel triumphant. You feel processed, like the Sphinx is still out there somewhere watching, waiting for the next answerless traveller to pass through. The next tale awaits, and this time the meat won't come from adult men or brave warriors. It'll come from those least able to fight back. The sun sinks low again, casting the world in that soft, dangerous light, the kind that flatters the landscape while hiding what's behind the trees. You follow a narrow dirt road now through fields overgrown with thistles and vines. The path feels rural, forgotten, but the dread that clings to your ankles is fresh and sharp. This is where the stories stop pretending to be noble. Because here we meet the Lamias, and what they eat isn't metaphorical, strategic, or earned through riddles. They eat children. The most famous Lamia was once a queen of Libya. Beautiful, beloved by Zeus, yes, him again, and punished for it by Hera, the original vengeance engine of Olympus. Hera, unable to strike Zeus directly, a recurring theme curses Lamia instead. Depending on the version, Hera either kills Lamia's children outright, or curses her with immortality and madness, so that she herself devours them in fits of divine-induced hunger. Neither outcome is comforting. Driven mad by grief and the unnatural curse festering in her belly, Lamia retreats into the shadows. Over time, she becomes a monster. Her beauty withers into something serpent-like. In some versions, she can remove her own eyes at night, so she won't see the horror she's become. And what she does now, she waits in the dark. She feeds on the young. You don't stumble upon Lamia like you would Scylla or the Minotaur. Lamia finds you. She sniffs out children. Newborns, toddlers, those with night terrors. She appears at the foot of beds or outside nursery windows, or disguised as a kindly old woman with sweets in her apron and malice in her teeth. Her victims are not warriors, they're not cursed kings or boastful hunters. They're vulnerable, soft, small. And that's what makes her myth stand apart. Lamia doesn't eat because she's evil. She eats because she was broken and never allowed to die. Historians argue whether Lamia was once a goddess herself, degraded by mythmakers into a cautionary figure. Some say she was an echo of earlier underworld deities stripped of divinity and turned into a threat to children as male-dominated religions expanded. Fringe scholars have an even more chilling take. They believe Lamia was created as a way for ancient societies to explain sudden infant death miscarriages and stillbirths. Grieving mothers blamed the Lamia. Priests gave them charms and prayers. The myth became both scapegoat and salve. There were even rituals. Tiny amulets hung above cradles. Salt scattered at thresholds. A drop of wine offered at night. Not to banish Lamia, but to appease her. To say, not this one. Not tonight. You stop beside a crumbling stone well in the field, moss clinging to the rim like green fingers. The sun has almost vanished now, and the air is turning cold. There's no sound but the breeze through the dry weeds, and still you hesitate to look over the edge. Because in the quiet places of Greek myth, the monsters aren't always loud. Sometimes they cry too. You feel a strange sympathy for Lamia, which is perhaps what makes her so frightening. She wasn't born monstrous. She was loved, betrayed, cursed. The hunger that defines her came from loss, not greed. And that's the real horror that grief, when twisted long enough, becomes appetite. She doesn't turn her victims into beasts. She turns her own pain into predation. Her curse is to relive the devouring over and over, not just as an act, but as a wound that never scabs over. You leave the well. A bird calls overhead, shrill, uncertain. The stars blink awake, silent and indifferent. And as you walk, you realise the stories are getting closer now. The beasts are no longer far away in caves or tucked behind riddles. They're entering homes, climbing stairs. And the next one, she doesn't just come for the innocent. She pretends to be one. Night has fully fallen now. The stars above are sharp and watchful. The air is still unnaturally so, like the earth itself is holding its breath. You follow a narrow trail, overgrown and too quiet. No crickets, no owls. Just the crunch of your steps and the creeping sense that you're being followed, not by something behind you, but by a story that knows where you're going. Up ahead, a crooked ridge juts from the hillside like a broken tooth. Perched atop it sits a creature that doesn't roar, doesn't hiss, and doesn't chase. She asks. This is Medea's sister sometimes, depending on the version, or a creature all her own. But tonight, it's the child sphinx, a cousin to the full-grown riddle killer of Thebes. Smaller, subtler, and infinitely more unsettling. She's described in obscure fragments, appearing to travellers not as a monster, but as a child. Lost, crying, maybe clutching a doll. She asks not riddles, but questions that are traps disguised as innocence. Things like, would you save your mother or your wife from a burning house? If the gods told you to kill your child, would you obey? Is it worse to betray your friend or your country? And when you try to answer earnestly, hesitantly, with sweat on your palms and your throat dry, she smiles and eats you anyway. Because there is no correct answer, only the illusion that reason can save you. She doesn't do this for fun. She does it because she believes in it. Her worldview is simple. If you can't survive the question, you don't deserve to survive the world. Unlike the original Sphinx who punished ignorance, the child Sphinx punishes ambiguity, and that makes her far more dangerous. Historians don't agree on whether she ever appeared in official Greek canon. She shows up in late fragments, local folk tales and borderland epics. But she's remembered, not because she had a temple, but because she waited outside them. Fringe mythographers believe she represents the darker side of philosophy, a personified paradox, the kind that breaks your logic like a neck. A warning that the pursuit of answers can be just as destructive as ignorance. Some link her to Eris, goddess of strife, claiming she is one of the many things born from Eris's golden apple, not war, but infinite questioning. A spiral of what-ifs that leads you not to truth, but to consumption, and it always ends the same way. You sit now on a stone ledge beneath the ridge. High above you swear you see a pair of small eyes glinting in the dark. Maybe it's a bird, or maybe it's her, waiting, curious. The thing about this myth is that it doesn't satisfy. There's no hero, no Theseus, no sword, because you can't kill a question, and you can't outrun one once you've heard it. You simply have to live with it or be eaten by it. Greek myths didn't just warn you about monsters outside the city walls. They warned you about the monsters in your own mind, the ones that look like harmless curiosity, the ones that speak in the voices of children, the ones that whisper, "What would you do?" and don't care what your answer is. They only care that you hesitated. You rise. The trail curves downward now toward the firelight of a city. You're not safe yet, because down there a feast is being prepared, and someone's about to serve themselves. The moon hangs low over a Corinthian hillside, pale and indifferent as the smell of boiling broth seeps through the palace windows. You creep toward the glow of torches and the rising hush of nervous chatter, invited to a feast that will become legend for all the wrong reasons. Tonight's chef, Medea, sorceress, princess of Colchis, and recent exile with scores to settle and spices to spare. Jason, yes, Golden Fleece Jason, has just dumped her for a younger, politically convenient bride. Glauce, a daughter of King Creon. Medea's heartbreak doesn't weep, it sharpens, and nothing whets her edge like the prospect of a potluck massacre cooked up in her own kitchen. You slip inside the banquet hall. Long tables gleam with silver, and a fragrant steam curls from a massive bronze cauldron at the centre. Guests linger, mouths watering, clueless that tonight's menu is Medea's way of saying, "Bon appetit, betrayal." She welcomes them in that soft, hypnotic voice. Second person present shivers along your spine. You feel her eyes linger on you just a touch too long. Then she ladles out a thick, aromatic stew, chunks of lamb, coils of fennel, sprigs of rue. It smells divine. It is divine because Medea's magic has turned a mundane mutton dish into a pharmacon, a potion that works two ways. Eat it, and if you're Jason's new in-laws, it becomes napalm in your veins. If you're Medea, it's just dinner. The first spoonfuls slip past royal lips. Compliments fly. Jason raises a cup, oblivious. But minutes later, Glaus gasps, clutching her throat as though the air itself has caught fire. Creon staggers, skin blistering where the stew touched. They burn from the inside out, collapsing amid overturned dishes. Linen ignites, gold platters melt, the potluck becomes a pyre and Medea. She steps back, cloak unscorched eyes reflecting the flames like twin coals. Mainstream historians cite Euripides' Medea 431 BCE as the primary source, noting how the playwright used her culinary revenge to challenge Athenian norms about foreign women marriage politics and the supposed civilized Greek palate. Self-deprecation. You sense scholars still argue whether Medea's poison represented real knowledge of Eastern toxins or purely theatrical exaggeration. A quirky tidbit. Roman writer Pliny the Elder mentions a Colchian herb called Ferula Medea allegedly lethal when boiled with goat fat. No proof it existed, but it shows how Medea's myth blurred into botanical lore for centuries. And then there's the fringe camp. They claim the whole fiery stew is thinly veiled commentary on xenophobia, the fear that foreign spices, cinnamon, cassia, frankincense would burn Greek virtue. Food as cultural boundary. Eat outside your comfort zone, and you risk more than heartburn. Back inside the hall, smoke thickens. Tapestries curl and blacken like autumn leaves. You hear Jason's shout, rage, anguish, disbelief. Medea doesn't flinch. She's busy with course 2, a gift for her ex-husband's pride, their own children slain by her hand, or the mob's historians bicker endlessly. Either way, she denies Jason every future mouthful of legacy. Historians still argue whether this filicide was original myth or Euripides' darker invention to shock the Dionysia festival judges. You stumble back, stomach lurching. The heat is unbearable, the stench worse, a stew of charred silk, molten bronze and hubris. Medea chants, softly wind-whipping her hair as she summons a dragon-drawn chariot. She ascends above the inferno, children's bodies cradled or discarded accounts, differ and vanishes into the night sky, leaving Jason amid ashes and echoes. The palace collapses. Flames roar up into the dark like a second sunrise, and you realize this feast has taught the sharpest lesson of the night. Sometimes the beast isn't the one who eats, but the one who cooks. Outside, the earth trembles before settling into an eerie calm. The stars reappear distant witnesses, too ancient to be surprised. You breathe in the cooler air, thick with smoke and moral ambiguity. Remember that earlier warning about divine cattle? About sacred boundaries, Medea flips that script. She weaponizes hospitality itself, turning love's leftovers into lethal fare. In Greek myth, a bad meal often punishes the eater. Medea ensures the meal is the punishment. You turn away from the smouldering ruin. Far off, a silver sliver of dawn teases the horizon, but rest will have to wait. Ahead lies another altar, another blade, and another lesson in how sacrifice can taste even harsher than revenge. The landscape opens wide now, no forest, no cliffs, just the pale, dust-blown emptiness of a sacred plain. The kind of place where myths come to a sudden, breathless stop. Here silence has weight, and in the centre of it all stands an altar. You walk toward it slowly. It's smooth polished, carved with old symbols of bulls, lions, and spiralling flames. A wind stirs your tunic. In the distance, soldiers whisper, priests pace, and one man, a king, stands apart, Agamemnon. This is the story of Iphigenia. You know him already, Agamemnon, son of Atreus, brother of Menelaus, commander of the Greek armies preparing to sail for Troy. But the gods have stilled the winds. No sails billow, No ships move. Time itself seems pinned down in the sand waiting. Why? Because Agamemnon offended Artemis, goddess of the hunt. Maybe he boasted too much. Maybe he killed a sacred deer. Or maybe the goddess simply demanded proof that he respected divine boundaries. Whatever the cause, the solution was brutally clear: sacrifice your daughter, Iphigenia. She's young, a princess. She has no weapons, no crimes, just the misfortune of being born into a story that runs on blood. Agamemnon hesitates as any father might. But his army is restless. His cause, revenge against Troy for the abduction of Helen, has momentum. And momentum in myth is a beast you can't just leash. So he sends for her under false pretenses. Come to Aulis to marry Achilles, he says. She comes smiling. She never sees it coming. Some say he hesitates to the last second. Others say he draws the blade himself. In Euripides' version, at the final moment, Artemis swaps Iphigenia with a deer. Smoke rises. The army cheers. No blood spilled. But other versions don't let her escape. Historians still argue whether the story of her rescue was a later addition crafted to soothe the audience. After all, how do you go from father to war hero if you're remembered first as a butcher? And what did Artemis want with a girl's blood anyway? Some say it was vengeance. Others say it was a test of loyalty, of control, of how far a man would go to please the gods, or perhaps just to keep his narrative moving. Fringe scholars have their own theories. One group believes Iphigenia's sacrifice reflects an echo of ancient human sacrifice rituals, later sanitized through divine intervention. Another argues she wasn't a victim at all, but a priestess in disguise, willingly offered up to ascend into immortality. You stand near the altar now. The blood has long since dried, but something sticks in the cracks between the stones. Not gore, just the impression of it. Like the myth itself left a residue. A cool wind stirs, the sails beyond the camp begin to flap just once, then again. The sacrifice worked. Agamemnon boards his ship, the Greeks sail to Troy. Thousands die. Glory is earned, honour defended. And yet this is what stays with you: a girl on a stone, her eyes wide, her fate not hers. It's ironic. Greek myths often punish people for eating what they shouldn't. But here no one eats. Here she is the offering, and in the years that follow, this moment will haunt every returning soldier. It will stain the halls of Mycenae. It will wake the furies in the blood of a household. Agamemnon may win his war, but at home, there are consequences waiting behind every locked door. You leave the altar behind, stepping softly as if your footsteps might wake the myth again. The sun is rising pale and guiltless, the sea is calm, and yet you feel something watching, not a monster this time, but memory itself. Because the meat may be gone, but the knife still remembers. The earth under your feet begins to change, greener, softer. The dust of sacrifice gives way to grass and moss, and the wind carries a new kind of weight wildness, untamed, impartial, old as shadow. You're no longer near a battlefield nor a throne room. This is the edge of a forest, a place where divinity does not care what your title is, or how noble your intentions may seem. Because now you walk into the realm of Artemis, goddess of the hunt, guardian of beasts, protector of the untouchable. And this is the part of the story where the hunters become the hunted. The Greeks loved Artemis. Sort of. She was divine, beautiful, and fiercely principled, but she was also terrifying. She didn't forgive, she didn't bargain, and if you crossed her even by accident, you might find yourself turned into a deer, a tree, or an echo depending on her mood. We've already seen her punish Actaeon, who stumbled upon her bathing and ended up torn apart by his own dogs. But Artemis's wrath goes far beyond personal privacy violations. In her world, the crime was often disrespecting the balance between hunger and reverence. There's a myth, not as famous but sharp as flint, about a young man named Orion, a gifted hunter and companion to Artemis. Some say they were friends, some say he wanted more, others say nothing romantic ever happened, that it was his hubris, his claim that he could kill every beast on earth that doomed him. Either way, Artemis lets a scorpion rise from the earth and strike him down. In other versions, it's Apollo, her brother, jealous or protective, who tricks Artemis into shooting Orion with an arrow. From a great distance, her greatest shot, her worst regret. Afterward, she places Orion in the sky, a constellation marked by silence. Historians still argue whether Artemis's myths reflect literal hunting taboos. Some think they serve to regulate sacred groves, to protect certain animals during festivals or breeding seasons. Others suggest she was a memory of older nature goddesses, absorbed into the Olympian hierarchy but never entirely tamed. And then, of course, the fringe interpretations. One school of thought claims Artemis didn't just punish excess, she punished unexamined hunger, the kind that turns the forest into a meat rack, the arrow into an entitlement. Her myths, they argue, were written to rewild the soul, to remind mortals that the world is not theirs to plunder. You pause beside a fallen stag. Its body is peaceful, untouched by violence. A tribute, perhaps, or a warning. You think of all the meat-eaters who became beasts in Greek myth, and how many of them crossed Artemis's invisible line, the moment desire overrides respect. She didn't hate hunters. She hated those who forgot the animal was more than meat. That's the recurring thread here, not just in her stories, but in all these tales. Transformation doesn't happen randomly. The gods don't just punish hunger, they punish entitlement. Eat what is offered, hunt what you bless, but kill what is sacred. You don't just lose your life, you lose your shape. The forest begins to thin, the wind brushes your skin like a warning. Somewhere behind you a branch snaps too sharp, too purposeful to be wind. But you don't turn around. You keep walking. Because even now, long after the last sacrifice, long after the last broken oath, Artemis doesn't forget. And just ahead, another truth awaits, because in myth, beasts and appetites always return. You step out of Artemis's forest, the air behind you still heavy with the weight of unspoken rules, unclaimed echoes. The terrain shifts now flatter, dustier, dotted with makeshift tents and cooking fires. You smell meat again, but this time it's human. And unlike before, this isn't a punishment for disobedience. It's a punishment for loyalty. This is the story of Iphigenia's aftermath, but from a new angle. Because while Agamemnon sails to war, and while Artemis's winds finally blow free, the one who remembers the cost of that sacrifice is Electra, Iphigenia's sister. And the one who exacts justice isn't a god. It's Orestes. You already know the story of how Agamemnon returns home triumphant from Troy, and is murdered by his wife Clytemnestra, Electra's mother. Some say she does it out of grief for Iphigenia. Others say it's revenge or power or rage. The myths don't agree. But what comes next is brutally clear. Orestes, the son of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra, returns years later, older, sharpened by exile, and with one goal to avenge his father. Electra urges him on. Together they slaughter their mother and her lover in the very palace that once served up Iphigenia's doom. No gods intervene, no one stops the knife. The myth doesn't flinch. But that's not the end. Because Orestes, having done what honour demanded, begins to rot inside. He's not transformed physically, not cursed to wear hooves or wings, but he is haunted, pursued by the Furies, ancient spirits of vengeance older than the Olympians. They chase him through cities, over mountains, across borders. They are relentless, blood-stained, shrieking things, not gods, not monsters, just inevitable. You see, in Greek myth, vengeance is never clean, and no matter how justified the meal, no matter how righteous the blade, if you spill kin's blood, the Furies come, always. Historians still argue whether the Orestes cycle is meant to reflect the evolution of Greek justice from personal revenge to civic law. In the Eumenides, Aeschylus has the goddess Athena intervene, creating the first court trial in myth to judge Orestes. She sides with him, and the Furies become tamer, softer rebranded as the kindly ones. But the stain of that first raw hunger, the one that starts with Iphigenia, never truly fades. A curious fact, in some fringe versions, Orestes is said to suffer from a mental sickness described as eating from within. Scholars argue it's a poetic phrase for madness. Others suggest it's a metaphor for self-consumption, a man devoured by his own guilt. And so here we are, a myth where no beast appears, but the characters are eaten anyway. By grief, by memory, by obligation turned inward until the soul begins to chew on itself. You pause near an ancient hearth, broken and overgrown. It once burned in the house of Atreus, where all this began. You touch the cold stones, you swear they tremble. Because there is a hunger worse than cannibalism in these stories, worse than being turned into a pig, a wolf, or a riddle's answer. It's the hunger for restitution, to balance the scales, to serve something cold that was always burning. And yet, the gods never truly eat. They watch, and that somehow feels more damning. You stand shoulders aching, the wind is dry again. The road ahead flattens into cracked stone, sun-bleached and sharp-edged. The next story, it isn't about kings or gods or curses. It's about why beasts eat at all, and why their hunger always looks so familiar. The ground beneath your feet begins to tremble not with force, but with memory. You've stepped off the mythic path of gods and heroes, and entered a more primal, older world. A place where stories aren't carved in marble, but breathed into bones. This is where you meet the werewolves of Greek lore, not quite the full moon howlers you might expect. These aren't hairy men with claws and cursed bites. No, these were meat-eaters turned into wolves because of one thing. They broke the sacred rule of hospitality. Welcome to the story of King Lycaon. He was a ruler of Arcadia, and depending on the version, either 50 times ambitious or 50 times foolish. His land was wild, mountainous, full of cultic energy and strange rituals. Lycaon was said to be cunning, proud, and very curious about the gods. So when Zeus disguised himself as a mortal and came down to test human hospitality, Lycaon decided to get clever. Instead of offering wine and bread like a good host, Lycaon prepared a special feast: human flesh. Some say it was a political prisoner. Others say worse, it was his own son Nyctimus dismembered, cooked, and served to the lightning god on a platter of fine silver. You know how this goes. Zeus, insulted beyond measure, throws the meal to the ground. The palace erupts in thunder. Fire rips through the halls. And Lycaon, he doesn't die. He becomes wolf-shaped, not just as punishment, but as revelation. If you act like a beast, you become one, forever. Historians still argue whether this myth was literal belief or moral allegory. Some claim it reflects real taboos around cannibalism, while others see it as a warning parable. Don't test the gods with clever tricks. They're older than irony. Fringe scholars have gone wilder. Some connect Lycaon's name linked etymologically to Lycos wolf to ancient rites of lycanthropy, practiced during secret mountain festivals. There are whispers of the Lycaea, an old Arcadian ritual where boys would wear animal skins, run wild, and possibly consume meat not meant for human mouths. You sit beside a cracked statue of a man with a wolf's head. His eyes are smooth from centuries of rain, but you imagine them once alert, golden, fixed on prey. Lycaon doesn't appear in many vase paintings. He's not a popular hero. He's not romantic. He's a myth, meant to be buried, but not forgotten. And the deeper horror, he's not the only one. Because Greek myth doesn't just give you one werewolf and move on. There are others, not always named, not always cursed by gods, just humans who gave in. A shepherd too hungry during winter who tasted a dead body and woke up unable to speak, only howl. A mother who fed her starving child meat she wouldn't name, only to find her reflection gone from the water. These aren't grand epics. They're warnings whispered around fires scrawled into the edges of older texts, that beneath every man is a mouth, and beneath every mouth a choice. Do you eat what is given, or do you take what is forbidden? You rise now, brushing off the dirt. The statue's shadow stretches behind you like a tail. You feel it just for a moment, that impulse to run, to lunge, to stop reasoning and start consuming. But you walk on, because you've seen what happens to those who let hunger define them. And ahead, the myths begin to break apart. Not into nothingness, but into the modern world where the stories still linger just under different names. Where the beasts no longer look like wolves or bulls or harpies. They look like people. You walk now into the shifting light of something strange, not quite myth, not quite modernity. It's a crossroads space where old stories don't end, but mutate. The gods are quieter here, the beasts subtler, and yet the hunger, it's still there. Welcome to the legacy of Greek myth's most persistent question. What happens when you eat the wrong thing again and again and again? And tonight that answer comes with a knife and fork. You step into a gleaming banquet hall, but it isn't ancient. It's half stone, half glass. Golden goblets, clean white linen, warm lighting. It could be a 5-star restaurant or a palace feast or both. And at the head of the table sits Tantalus, smiling, as if he's not the reason this whole mythic mess exists. He was once mortal, a king beloved by the gods invited to dine at Olympus itself. Imagine that. Roasted ambrosia, vintage nectar, jokes with Apollo, dessert with Demeter. But Tantalus got greedy. He wanted to test the gods, see if they were really all-knowing. So he invited them to his banquet and served them a very special dish. His own son Pelops stewed in spices and laid out in silver bowls. No one ate, not really. all except Demeter distracted by grief who took a bite of the shoulder. Once the deception was revealed, the gods were understandably furious. They resurrected Pelops, gave him an ivory shoulder to replace what was eaten, and cast Tantalus into Tartarus, the deepest pit of the underworld. And here's where it gets worse. His punishment. To stand in a pool of water with fruit hanging overhead. Every time he reaches, the water recedes. The fruit lifts, forever out of reach. That's where the word tantalize comes from. He can see the feast, smell it, crave it, but never taste it. Historians still argue whether this myth was an allegory about sacrificial taboos or an actual memory of kings who violated burial customs. Some even suggest Tantalus's banquet was a twisted memory of prehistoric rites where royalty proved power by controlling death itself. But fringe scholars go further. They claim Tantalus's myth is the template, the starting point for every future cautionary tale where eating the wrong thing transforms you. He wasn't just punished for murder, he was punished for making a meal out of trust, for turning hospitality into horror, for confusing intimacy with dominance, and the curse passed on to his son Pelops, who cheated in a chariot race by sabotaging his rival's vehicle, to Pelops's sons Atreus and Thyestes, who cannibalized children and cursed their bloodline forever, to Agamemnon, to Orestes, to the myths you've been walking through all night. You glance at the banquet table again. The food is glistening, warm, fragrant, a roasted bird dripping with honey and thyme, a bowl of figs so ripe they split under their own weight. And yet, you do not eat. Because now you know the most dangerous meals in Greek myth don't come from monsters. They come from family. They come with love and power and tests. You step away from the table. Somewhere behind you, Tantalus groans. Not from pain, but from the echo of a hunger that will never be satisfied. Outside, the world begins to dim, not into night, but into memory. The myths are dissolving now. Not gone, just quieter. You walk down a long corridor where shadows flicker across marble. The last story waits at the far end. And after that, a different kind of stillness. You've made it to the final chamber where stories no longer roar but whisper. No gods shouting, no monsters clawing. Just you, the echo of footsteps, and a table carved from stone cold, ancient and waiting. There's no one here now, only you. And the question that's hovered over every myth you've walked through. Why do meat-eaters in Greek myths always turn into beasts? Was it because the gods hated hunger? No, it's because they hated what hunger revealed. You think back to Lycaon, to Tantalus, to the countless nameless figures who fed on flesh, sometimes their enemies, sometimes their families, sometimes their own children. And every time the punishment was not death, it was transformation. Because the Greeks didn't believe punishment meant ending someone. It meant revealing them. The wolf was already in Lycaon. The bull already waited inside the Minotaur's lineage. The pigs Circe made of men. She didn't curse them. She clarified them. That was always her trick. She said, I didn't make them swine. I made their outside match their inside. A terrifying idea, isn't it? That deep down, maybe all of us are walking around on the brink of our true form. That it's not the gods who make us beasts. It's our own appetites. Historians still argue whether these stories were psychological allegories or religious propaganda. Some say they taught children not to stray from cultural norms. Others say they were reflections of inner guilt around food power and domination. Fringe thinkers go even deeper. One theory suggests that every meat-eater who becomes a beast is really an echo of ancient shamanic rites. The wearing of animal skins, the belief that consuming an animal gave you its spirit. But if done improperly, that spirit consumed you back. And so the beast emerged not from the bite, but from the blurred boundary between man and animal, between hunger and honor, between feast and ritual. You walk past frescoes on the wall. They show no gore, no violence, just shapes, shifting fingers, curling into claws, spines, arching faces, elongating. Every transformation is silent, almost peaceful. Because in Greek myth, once you become the thing you feared, there is no screaming left to do. Now, for the first time in this entire journey, you feel the exhaustion settle in. Not fear, not guilt, just a quiet, heavy awareness. That stories never leave you hungry. They leave you changed. You pause beside the last stone marker. It bears no name, only a single carved line. Be careful what feeds you. You smile, not because it's funny, but because it's true. You've seen enough now to know that what you consume, stories, beliefs, revenge, even literal meals, shapes you. And when you lose control of that hunger, the shape becomes permanent. Outside, the sky is pale and pulsing. Morning waits just beyond the last veil of darkness. But before you go, let's ease into the closing notes together. So now the footsteps quiet, the torches dim. You've wandered through fires, feasts, transformations, and terrors. But you're still here, whole, listening. The myths may have been strange, even horrifying at times, but you made it through not by running from the beasts, but by understanding them, their hunger, their grief, their questions with no answers. Breathe a little slower now. In through your nose, out through your chest. Imagine the world softening around the edges, the marble halls fading into mist, the howls and growls and chants slipping gently into silence. The stories settle like dust on old parchment, quiet, weightless, waiting to be dreamed again. Let your shoulders relax, your jaw unclench. You don't have to solve anything tonight. You don't have to outrun fate or translate ancient riddles. You just have to rest knowing that every strange tale, every broken king, every vengeful goddess, every cursed meal was a way of saying, you are not alone in your questions. And tomorrow the stories will still be there. But for now, there is only you. Safe, still, suspended in this slow drifting space between myth and memory. Sleep well, Beast Walker. And may your dreams be strange in only the best ways.